New Year's Eve always sneaks up on you, doesn't it? That strange night where people either hope the next year will be different or try to forget the last one. For me, it started like always. My best friend Mia dragging me into something I wasn't sure about. This time it was a massive house party in the city. Come on, she said, bouncing with excitement as she pulled on her boots. It's at this crazy old Victorian place. You'll love it. I rolled my eyes. That's just code for falling apart. She laughed, tossing me a scarf. You'll thank me later, trust me. And because I always did, I found myself shivering outside a house that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. A sagging roof, peeling windows, and an eerie vibe that made my stomach twist. But once we stepped inside, the cold vanished. Instead, heat, loud music, and a sea of people swallowed us whole. Mia disappeared instantly, vanishing into the crowd like she always did. Typical Mia. I hovered near the kitchen, gripping a plastic cup of something vaguely champagne-like. The air was thick with the smell of cheap cologne, spilled drinks, and the musty scent of an old house. I wandered through the rooms, letting the energy pull me along. In the living room, people were dancing like maniacs, limbs flailing everywhere. Upstairs, I found a group crowded around a guy with a guitar, singing loudly and terribly off-key. And then I saw him, a guy near the staircase. He wasn't talking or dancing, just watching. His eyes scanned the room with sharp focus, like he was taking stock of everything. A few minutes later, I spotted another guy down the hall. Same vibe still, watchful. Then another leaning against a bathroom door. The hairs on my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. But it was New Year's Eve. Strangers watching strangers wasn't exactly breaking news, right? So I shook it off, or tried to. The countdown started. 10, 9, 8, glasses raised, phones out. Everyone recording like they needed proof they were happy. 3, 2, 1. The room exploded. Cheers, hugs, kisses, confetti raining from somewhere above. Pure, unfiltered joy. And then the scream. A low, sharp, gut-wrenching sound that sliced through the celebration like a knife. The music cut off mid-beat. A chilling silence spread through the house. Then, chaos. Someone bolted for the door, shoving past me so hard I nearly fell. Shouts echoed downstairs. A loud crash. Glass breaking. Furniture smashing. I turned to the staircase just in time to see them. Two men, faces covered in ski masks, charging up with baseball bats. My stomach dropped. One of them was the guy from the stairs. Panic swallowed the room whole. People screamed, shoved, and ran like wild animals. My heart pounded as I fought my way through the chaos, desperately searching for Mia. I ended up in a small bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I twisted the lock. Outside, heavy footsteps stomped through the house. Someone shouted, "Phones, wallets, now!" Another crash, then crying, begging. My breath hitched. I scanned the room for an escape. The window. The latch was old, rusted. My fingers slipped against the glass. Come on, come on! Outside, the chaos raged on. A car idled near the curb, its headlights casting long shadows across the street. A man stood beside it, calm, collected, pulling a duffel bag from the trunk. Like he had all the time in the world. Behind me, the door burst open with a deafening crack. I didn't think. I jumped. I hit the ground hard. Pain shot up my side, rattling my bones. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, instinct kicked in. I scrambled to my feet and ran. My lungs burned, my legs shook. But I didn't stop. Behind me, the sounds of the house faded, replaced only by the rapid pounding of my own footsteps. When I finally stopped, my back pressed against a brick wall, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I fumbled for my phone, tried calling Mia, once, twice, 3 times, voicemail. The rest of the night is a blur. I found out later, the masked men tore through the house, smashing everything, stealing everything. Mia, she got hurt, badly. She survived. But something in her changed that night. The spark that made her Mia, it was gone. New Year's Eve is supposed to be about new beginnings. But for me, it's just a reminder. Second story. New Year's Eve always felt like just another night to me. People celebrated, made resolutions, and hoped for a fresh start. But for me, it was just a reminder of what I had lost. I moved into this neighborhood a few months ago. I didn't know anyone well enough to feel included, though my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, had invited me over more than once. "It's nothing fancy, just a little champagne and good company," she had said with a warm smile. But I declined. "I'm more of a quiet New Year's guy," I told her. The truth? I wasn't much for celebrations anymore. My divorce had drained the joy out of me, and the holidays had become something I just endured. Tonight was no different. I sat on my couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, the muted TV playing in the background. Outside, fireworks cracked in the distance, and the faint sound of laughter spilled in from the street. It wasn't quiet, but it still felt empty. Then I heard it. At first, it was just a dull thud, faint enough that I thought I imagined it. Then it came again, and again, heavy, deliberate sounds. They came from Mrs. Reynolds' house. I paused the TV and listened. Then, voices, not the happy, cheerful kind, sharp, angry. I leaned closer to the wall, straining to hear. Then, silence. A few seconds passed. Then I heard it. A scream. It wasn't loud. It wasn't like a horror movie scream, but it was sharp, sudden, unmistakably human. The kind of sound that makes your heart pound before your brain catches up. I froze. For a few seconds, I sat there, trying to convince myself I hadn't heard what I thought I did. Then footsteps, heavy, hurried, purposeful, moving through Mrs. Reynolds' house. Then they stopped. My stomach turned. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, steady. "I think something's happening next door," I stammered. I heard banging, and then a scream. The operator asked for my address. I gave it to her. As I spoke, I moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. That's when I saw him. A man I didn't recognize stepped out of Mrs. Reynolds' front door. He was wearing dark clothes, carrying a duffel bag. His movements were quick, almost jerky, like he didn't want to be seen. He glanced around once, then hurried down the driveway and disappeared into the shadows. "Someone just left her house," I whispered into the phone. "He had a bag. I couldn't bring myself to say it. "Stay inside and lock your door," the operator instructed. "Officers are on their way." I sat by the window, phone clutched tightly in my hand, watching the street. Then finally, flashing red and blue lights. 2 police cars pulled up. Officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. They knocked on Mrs. Reynolds' door. No answer. Then they forced it open. From my window, I could see glimpses of movement inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness, shadows shifting back and forth. Then one of the officers ran outside. His face was pale. He shouted something I couldn't hear. Another officer reached for the radio on his shoulder, called for backup. More cars arrived. Detectives, paramedics. I didn't need anyone to tell me what they found. I could see it on their faces. Whatever happened inside that house, it wasn't good. He introduced himself as Detective Harris. "Did you hear or see anything unusual?" he asked. I told him everything. The noises, the scream, the man with the duffel bag. He nodded as he took notes, his expression grim. "Thank you for calling this in," he said. "It might have saved someone else's life." His words hung in the air, heavy, cold. Someone else's life, not Mrs. Reynolds. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with fear and speculation. No one could believe it. Mrs. Reynolds was kind, quiet, helpful. Who would want to hurt her? The police found the answer soon enough. The man I saw, the one with the duffel bag, he was her nephew, someone she had been trying to help despite his troubled past. That night, when she refused to give him money, he snapped. I think about how I sat just a thin wall away while it happened. If I had called sooner, could I have stopped it? Could I have saved her? I'll never know. But every year when the clock strikes midnight and the fireworks explode in the sky, I don't think about new beginnings. I think about how close she was to surviving. Third story. My first New Year's in my new house was supposed to be peaceful. I had pictured it clearly. Cozy, quiet, uneventful. For years, I had dreamed of having a place of my own, and now, finally, I had it. A small but charming house with creaky floors and old-fashioned fixtures. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The first thing I did was set up a reading nook by the bay window, imagining endless evenings with books, my cat, and a glass of wine. I had worked hard to get here, balancing a PhD program while saving every penny. My dad even helped with the final financing. When I signed the papers, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The neighborhood seemed ideal. Quiet, slow-paced, private, or so I thought. His name was Mr. Carter. At first, he didn't seem threatening, just a lonely old man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and an awkward smile. At the local coffee shop, people spoke highly of him. "Oh, Mr. Carter, he's the best, always helping people out. You're lucky to have him as a neighbor." That word, lucky, would haunt me. Carter was the first person to greet me before the moving truck even finished backing into my driveway. "Need a hand?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before grabbing a box. He insisted we exchange numbers, just in case. At the time, I thought he was just being friendly. Maybe a little overzealous, but harmless. At first, it was simple enough. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Let me know if you need anything." I thanked him. Then a few days later, "Left something for you on the porch." I opened the door and found a small trinket box, hand-painted, amateurish. A clumsy drawing of a cat on the lid. It made my stomach tighten. Was this thoughtful, or was it something else? I thanked him again, but my unease lingered. Then came more messages. At first, they were harmless. "How are you settling in? Need help with anything?" Then the tone shifted. He started using pet names. Sweetie, darling. I stopped responding. Then, gifts started appearing. Fishing lures in my mailbox, a wooden figurine on my doorstep. But the worst? One morning I stepped outside and found a wreath of bones hanging on my back fence. I stared at it, frozen. It looked handcrafted, carefully arranged. Was it some kind of twisted art project? Or was it a message? I convinced myself to stay inside and focus on work. My cat curled up beside me, a mug of tea in my hands. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, aside from the occasional distant pop of fireworks. Then around 10 p.m., I heard something outside. Thud, thud, scraping, then muttering. I told myself it was nothing. Then my phone buzzed. "Mr. Carter. Happy New Year. Come outside. I have something special for you." My heart sank. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the window and froze. Carter was in his yard, pacing, a gasoline can in his hand. My breath caught in my throat. His movements were erratic, frantic, animalistic. Then he poured gasoline in a wide circle around his yard. I felt my body go cold. Then he struck a match. The orange glow of the flames lit up his face. His wild eyes locked onto my house. And then he shouted, "You think you're too good for me, huh? Sitting in there, acting like you're better than everyone else." His voice cracked with rage. "I'll show you. I'll show everyone." I stumbled back from the window, hands shaking as I dialed 911. Then his voice cut through the night. "Happy New Year, you stuck-up little harlot." He hurled the empty gas can into the fire, sending sparks shooting into the sky. Then he laughed, a horrible, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. Flashing lights, sirens. The police tackled Carter to the ground. He didn't fight, just kept muttering. The voices told me to do it. I watched from the safety of my living room, my knees drawn to my chest. But it didn't end there. Standing in his yard, like nothing had happened, he had been released. Some technicality. The no-contact order I filed? Useless. He waved when he saw me, a slow, lingering wave. With a smug smile, like he knew something I didn't. The roar of the fire, the crackling of the flames, the way his voice sliced through the cold air. My boyfriend moved in soon after. We're saving every penny to leave this place. But until then, I'm stuck here, knowing Carter is still next door. And every midnight, as fireworks light up the sky, I hold my breath. Because deep down, I know it's not over. Not really. Fourth story. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a night of hope, a fresh start, a new beginning. But for me, it became the night everything changed. I wish I could tell you I was excited, or even mildly optimistic, but I wasn't. My little sister Emily, though, she had this way of pretending everything was okay. She curled up on the couch, wrapped in 3 sweaters, sipping tea from that chipped old mug she refused to throw away. She even insisted we decorate, even though all we had was one string of half-working fairy lights. She hung them up like she had lit up the Rockefeller Center tree. I didn't have the heart to tell her how pathetic they looked. For Emily, that tiny flicker of light was enough. For me, not so much. I sat across from her, staring at my phone. That morning, the landlord's final warning came in. $1,200. Midnight deadline. No extensions. The weight of it sat heavy in my chest. Every time I glanced at Emily, it got worse. She didn't deserve this. Her health was already a battle. And now we were on the verge of losing our home. By the time the streetlights flickered on, I couldn't take it anymore. The apartment felt like it was closing in. "I'm going out for some air." Emily tilted her head, concerned. "You okay, Liam?" I forced a weak smile. "Yeah, just need a minute. Don't wait up." Her gentle optimism never wavered. "We'll figure this out." I nodded. Didn't trust myself to respond. Then I stepped out into the night. People laughed, held hands, popped champagne corks. Every smile, every burst of laughter was a reminder of how far I was from that kind of joy. I shoved my hands in my pockets and walked aimlessly. My thoughts spiraled in a loop of desperation. $87. That's all I had. The number mocked me, over and over. Then I ended up in front of that old bakery. It had been closed for years. The air smelled stale, like flour and dust. I sank onto the cracked steps, my head in my hands. Then he appeared, like he had been conjured out of thin air. Tall, dressed in a gray suit so sharp it could cut glass. His shoes gleamed under the streetlight, spotless. Everything about him was too perfect, too precise. "You look like someone with a problem," he said smoothly. I should have ignored him, but in that moment, with the weight of the world pressing down on me, I looked up. "What's it to you?" He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was thin, calculated, like he already knew what I was going to say. "It's New Year's, time for fresh starts." Then he pulled a black card from his pocket, handed it to me. Just a single phone number in silver ink. No name, no logo, just a number. "Call if you're ready to change your luck." Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. The cold air bit at my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A reminder from the landlord. Midnight. No excuses. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to make the call, but I didn't see another way. With shaking hands, I dialed. The phone rang twice, then a voice, calm, flat, robotic. "What do you need?" My throat felt dry. "I need the landlord gone." A pause, then, "Address?" I hesitated, then gave it, my voice barely above a whisper. "Payment is $50, non-refundable. Once confirmed, there's no going back." I wired the money before I could think too much about it. The voice on the line responded, "It will be done by midnight." Then the call ended. Emily greeted me with her usual warmth. She had made instant noodles, set the table, trying to make something special out of nothing. I tried to eat, but every bite tasted like ash. I couldn't tell her. Couldn't. The hours ticked by, the tension suffocating. Then, 11:45 p.m., a knock at the door. My heart stopped. Emily moved to answer. "I'll get it." But I was already on my feet. "No." My voice was too sharp. She froze, confused. "I'll get it." My hands shook as I reached for the knob. I opened the door and saw him. "Time's up, Liam." Before I could respond, a shadow moved behind him. My breath caught. A hooded figure stepped out of the darkness. A glint of metal. Then, a sharp movement. The gunshot shattered the night. The landlord collapsed, blood pooling on the concrete. Emily screamed, "Oh my God, Liam! What just happened? Who?" I couldn't answer, because the hooded man didn't even look at me. He turned and walked away, like it was nothing. The police asked their questions, We told them the story they wanted to hear, that the landlord was attacked by a stranger. They believed us, left us with hollow reassurances and a silence heavier than before. The fairy lights blinked behind us. Outside, fireworks exploded in the sky, bright, careless, mocking the nightmare we just lived through. Emily leaned against my shoulder. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I thought about the man in the suit, the black card, the price I paid, not just in money, but in guilt, fear. I had started this. "We'll figure it out," I said, wrapping an arm around her. The words felt hollow, but I had to believe them. For her. Fifth story. Life has a way of falling into a predictable rhythm. Same routine, same schedule, commuting at the same time, walking the same route home. Some people call it boring, but I liked it. No surprises, no stress. Just get through the day and everything's fine. Or at least that's what I thought. The office was nearly empty when I finished my shift. Everyone else had taken the day off or left early to celebrate. But not me. I didn't have big plans. The city outside was buzzing with excitement. Crowds of people laughing, shopping, getting ready for parties. But for me, it was just another walk home. I stepped off the train, the cold crisp against my face. The smell of street food lingered in the air. The streets were still crowded, but as I walked, the noise slowly faded. Then I felt it. Something was off. At first, it was just a feeling, that strange sense that someone's eyes are on you. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, a man, a few steps behind me, walking at a steady pace. I told myself I was being paranoid. People walk alone at night all the time, right? But then I glanced back again, and this time our eyes met. He wasn't looking around like a normal pedestrian. He wasn't on his phone. His gaze was locked on me, focused, calculated, like he was waiting for something. That's when the panic started creeping in. I turned a corner, hoping to lose him. But when I looked back, he was still there. Same pace, same distance, same watchful stare, like he had been following me for miles. My stomach tightened. I took a sharp turn into an alley, hoping to disappear. But then, his footsteps quickened. I pressed myself into the shadows, heart hammering in my chest. Then, silence. His footsteps stopped, right next to me. I could hear his breathing, heavy, unsteady. He hadn't seen me yet. I held my breath, praying he would just walk away. But he didn't. For what felt like an eternity, he just stood there. Then finally, his footsteps faded into the distance. I waited until I was sure he was gone, then hurried home, trying to shake the dread creeping up my spine. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I woke up to cold steel pressing against my throat. My eyes snapped open, and there he was, standing over me in the dark. His breath reeked of booze, and something worse. The knife in his hand pressed harder against my skin. "Move an inch," he growled, "and I'll slit your throat." My body froze. My mind screamed. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it was. "What do you want?" I choked out. His lip curled. "Your money. Then I leave." I nodded, hands shaking as I reached for my wallet. My mind raced. How did he get in? Had he been watching me all along? That's when I noticed. Maria, still in bed beside me, her eyes wide with terror. But instead of staying hidden, she reached under the mattress, gripped the gun we kept for protection. She pulled the trigger. Click. The safety was still on. The sound of failure filled the room like a death sentence. The man heard it, turned, and for just a second, I had my chance. I shoved him with everything I had. His fist slammed into my face. Pain exploded through my jaw. But I didn't stop. I ran for the kid's room, but he was faster. The blade sliced through my leg. I hit the ground, pain ripping through me. But I couldn't stop. I heard Maria trying the gun again. Her hands were shaking too much. Then, his voice. Low, dangerous. "Get away from her." He had our daughter, Sabrina, her tiny body frozen in fear, his knife pressed against her neck. "You had to ruin it," he muttered. His voice trembled with rage. My body went cold. All the pain, all the fear, it didn't matter anymore. If you hurt her, I growled, voice deadly quiet, I will kill you. And for a second, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Just for a second. Then, Maria fired again. This time the bullet didn't miss. A second shot. Then, silence. The police arrived minutes later. They said it was self-defense. They said I did the right thing. Physically, we were okay. But inside, none of us were. That predictable rhythm I used to love, it's not safe anymore. Not after what happened. Now when I walk home, I check every shadow, every reflection, because in the back of my mind, I keep asking, what if? I thought New Year's was just another night, but it wasn't. It was the night that changed everything. Six-story New Year's Eve was supposed to be like any other. I didn't make big plans, didn't care much for parties. I just wanted a quiet night, a warm bed, maybe watch the fireworks from my window. But this year was different. It started with a call from my best friend Natalie. Her voice bubbled with excitement. You have to come with us tonight. It's going to be amazing. She and her boyfriend Jake were heading to the downtown New Year's festival. Max is coming too, she added. Maximum. I didn't know him well, but something about him always made me uneasy. I wanted to say no. Crowds weren't really my thing, but Natalie was persistent, and I didn't want to be alone. So against my better judgment, I said yes. And that's how it all began. The streets glowed with fairy lights. Music spilled from bars. Laughter echoed from every direction. It should have felt magical, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way Max kept watching me, or maybe it was just paranoia. Either way, I pushed the thought aside. We spent the evening grabbing snacks, going on carnival rides, watching street performers. For a while, I let myself enjoy it. Then, 11:40 p.m., Natalie suddenly froze, her face tight with tension. Her eyes darted around the crowd. I stepped closer. What's wrong? She forced a smile. Nothing, but I could tell. She was lying. Her voice was low, shaky. Every instinct in me screamed, but I didn't turn around. We need to walk faster, she whispered, and we did. Every step felt heavier, the air thicker. I couldn't help myself. I glanced back, and my blood ran cold. 3 men, all dressed in dark hoodies, faces hidden behind bandanas. Their pace matched ours. Their eyes locked onto us. Natalie's grip tightened on my arm. They've been following us since the festival. My stomach twisted. We were being hunted. We moved faster. So did they. Footsteps echoing in the empty streets. Too synchronized. Too deliberate. We needed to get out of sight. Now Natalie's eyes flicked toward a narrow alley. Shortcut, she whispered. It was a risk, but staying in the open felt worse. We darted into the darkness. Through the alley. Through the bushes. Our breaths ragged. Hearts pounding. Then, the sound of footsteps behind us, louder, closer. I didn't dare look back. We just ran. People, lights, safety. I bent over, gasping for air. Natalie gripped my wrist. Don't stop, she whispered. My body screamed for rest, but something told me she was right. I turned around, and there they were, still watching. The way their eyes followed us, the way their footsteps never faltered. They never ran, never rushed, like they knew we couldn't escape, like they were just waiting. 7th story. I was alone in a cabin deep in the Oregon woods, the kind of place that looks straight out of a postcard, surrounded by towering pines far from the noise of the world, perfect for someone looking to escape. At first it felt like paradise. Then, as the night went on, it felt like something else was out there, watching, waiting, something that wasn't supposed to be there. I was part of a construction crew building a luxury cabin for a rich couple. We were almost done. The walls were up, the roof was on, just a few finishing touches left. The rest of the crew had left for town to celebrate the new year, but I stayed behind. Company rules were clear, no theft. And with expensive tools and supplies lying around, someone had to watch the site. So there I was, sitting alone in an unfinished cabin, listening to the hum of a single lantern. The air was cool, damp, silent. Then, the storm started. By 8 p.m., it was a light drizzle. By 10 p.m., it was a downpour. Wind howled through the trees, rattling the plastic covering the windows. The whole cabin seemed to shudder under the weight of the storm. I tried to focus on my book, but the rain was so loud. Then I heard something else, a sound that didn't belong, a tapping, faint, then louder, moving around the cabin, circling. My breath hitched. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was deliberate, a sharp, heavy impact against the back wall. I froze, told myself it was a branch from the storm, but it didn't sound like a branch. It sounded like a fist. I grabbed a hammer from my bag. It felt ridiculous, but it made me feel less vulnerable. I moved toward the back of the cabin, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, the scraping started. Metal on wood, slow, deliberate, like someone was dragging a blade across the wall. I turned off my flashlight, plunged myself into darkness, and waited. 3 sharp raps against the wall, right where I was standing. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The silence after that, deafening. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The woods outside were too dense, too wild, and whatever was out there, I wasn't sure I could outrun it. Pulled planks of wood from the supply pile, nailed them over the windows and entrance. My hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the hammer. The storm raged outside, but inside, everything was still. For a moment I thought, maybe it was over. Then, the scraping moved to the roof, nails on wood, crawling. My flashlight shook in my hand. I stared up at the ceiling, held my breath. Then, bang! Something heavy hit the roof, landed with a sickening thud outside. I didn't move, didn't dare breathe. The storm masked the sound. But I knew something was out there, waiting. Blood, thick, metallic, seeping under the front door. I staggered back, shone my flashlight on it, and my stomach dropped. A dark, thick liquid pooled at the entrance. Then, a scream tore through the night. It wasn't human. It was guttural, wild, the sound of something in pain. But there was something else in it. Something human. Not even the rain. Not even the wind. Like the whole world was holding its breath. I didn't move. Didn't dare. Hours passed. Then at dawn, the storm ended. The ground was muddy, littered with broken branches, but the footprints, still there, bare, human, leading from the back of the cabin, disappearing into the trees. I packed my things, left before noon. Didn't tell anyone what happened. They wouldn't believe me anyway. They'd say it was an animal, my imagination. But I know what I heard, what I smelled, what I felt. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. And I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it wanted. 8th story. You can never truly know someone. I used to think it was just one of those things people say, like a motivational quote on a cheap poster. But after what happened on New Year's Eve, I understand it in a way I never wanted to. This isn't a story I like telling, but every year when the clock strikes midnight, I remember. So let me take you back. Everyone knew everyone. And the biggest event of the year? The New Year's Eve celebration in the town square. Families bundled up in scarves and jackets, sipping on hot cider. It was simple, familiar. That year, I almost didn't go. Not because I didn't want to, but because my mom had a request I couldn't ignore. She handed me a mantel clock, an old family heirloom. It had stopped ticking. "Take it to Mr. Grayson," she said. "We can't start the year with a silent clock." I rolled my eyes but agreed. I stepped inside and the warmth hit me instantly. The air smelled like varnish, oil, and something metallic. Clocks lined the walls, ticking in an uneven, chaotic rhythm. I found Mr. Grayson behind the counter. Thin glasses, a warm smile, the kind of man everyone trusted. "Ah, Alex," he said, "bringing me a New Year's challenge?" I placed the clock on the counter. "It stopped working a few days ago. My mom's freaking out." He chuckled. "Mothers and their superstitions." Then he paused. His eyes lingered on the clock a little too long. "This won't take long," he murmured. "While you wait, want to see something special?" I hesitated, something about the way he said it, but curiosity won. "All right." He led me to a door I had never noticed before. It creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room. At its center, a massive, ancient clock, carved in intricate designs. Its hands twitched, jerked, moving in an unnatural rhythm. "This isn't just a clock, Alex." His voice was low, reverent. "It's a window." I frowned. "A window to what?" He flipped a switch on the side of the clock, and everything changed. The walls dissolved into darkness. A low hum filled the air. The clock's hands spun wildly, moving faster than any timepiece should. And then they appeared. Figures stepping out of the shadows. Not quite human. Their faces were blurred, their movements slow and deliberate. And they were watching me. Mr. Grayson's voice barely a whisper. They observed time, every moment, every decision. And now, they're here for you. My breath caught. For me? Why? He smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. To see if you're ready. The figures moved closer. Their whispers rose, an unintelligible chorus of voices. The air grew thick, heavy. The door was gone. The room stretched into endless blackness. Don't fight it, Alex. Mr. Grayson's voice was calm, too calm. If you resist, you'll ruin everything. I lunged for the clock. If it had started this, maybe it could end this. I grabbed the wooden frame and shoved it with everything I had. The crash was deafening. The glow vanished. The whispers stopped. The figures melted back into the dark. And when the lights flickered back on, I was alone. Mr. Grayson stared at the broken clock. His expression was pure rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? He hissed, bolted out of the shop into the cold night air. The clock in the town square struck midnight just as I reached the crowd. I turned back, but the shop was dark, silent, like it had never been open at all. The shop boarded up. No one spoke of him, no one remembered him, but I do. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear it. The faint ticking of a clock that shouldn't exist. A reminder that he's still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble into his world. Ninth final story. New Year's Eve was supposed to be the best night of the year, and for me, it was, until it wasn't. I was at the biggest party in town, surrounded by music, laughter, and people I barely knew. Everyone was drunk on excitement, on alcohol, on the promise of a fresh start. But somewhere between the countdown and the confetti, I realized something was wrong. I was missing time. A song would be playing, and then suddenly I'd realize I had no memory of the last few minutes, like I had blinked and time had skipped forward. At first I blamed it on the drinks, except I wasn't drinking. I had only had soda. So why did I feel disoriented? It was hanging in the hallway, just outside the main party room. I caught my reflection as I walked past, and then I stopped. Because the person in the mirror? She wasn't me. She looked like me. Same dress, same hair, same expression. But something was off. Her eyes, they were watching me, studying me. Then she smiled. I didn't. I took a step back. She stayed still. A horrible realization crawled up my spine. The reflection wasn't mine. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. The party around me felt far away, muffled. I turned away from the mirror, heart pounding. I needed air. I pushed through the crowd, heading for the balcony. That's when I heard it, a voice, right behind me. Going somewhere? I turned, but no one was there, just the mirror. And my reflection smiling back at me, out the door, into the night. Cold air hit my face, shocking me back into reality. But something felt wrong. The streets were empty, no fireworks, no music, no people, just silence. Like the world had been wiped clean. I spun around. The party house was gone. In its place, a long, endless road stretching into nothing. And standing at the end of it, Mr. Slow, purposeful. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She stopped just inches away. Her face, my face, tilted to the side, and then she whispered, "It's my turn now." Then, darkness. The party, gone. The street, normal. Everything felt like a dream. But as I got up, I noticed something. The mirror in my bedroom, and that reflection looking back at me, it smiled. And I didn't. Because I don't know if I'm still me, or if she's already taken my place.